Hey, friends. It's been a day of, well, in some ways, just a fun, playful Sunday. We had a birthday party. Uh, Annalie spent the night at her grandparents', so we kind of had a nice long morning on daylight savings. And so, in some ways, it was just a kind of nice, easy, joyful day. I think, something that tends to show up for me, and I've noticed it especially when I don't have specific concerns that are kind of impinging on me, like when the acuteness of certain issues subsides a little bit. Um, I find myself going to a place of kind of sensing for purpose, sensing for how might my day-to-day, moment-to-moment orientation change such that there's more purpose juice, that's a thing, flowing through me at all times. And it's almost like, crises, when you're in a crisis or when there's some kind of acute problem, or even just doesn't have to be acute, it just has to be, urgent enough to get your attention. Those things, a lot of times, they will be the moments where I realize I want to make a change of some kind. But also during those times, there's a fair amount of bandwidth tied up in just managing that thing, that whatever the current problem du jour happens to be. And so actually changing, actually doing the work of realigning and recalibrating kind of big picture stuff, it's kind of hard to do in those circumstances, because we might see the need for it, and we might actually in those moments really get a clear picture of what the need is. But those aren't always the best conditions under which to genuinely undergo spiritual transformation or even personal transformation. There's something about the transformational process that requires a degree of freedom. It requires a certain amount of presence, headspace. And so I notice on a day like today, a lovely, beautiful day like today, I get this like, I'm looking for something. It's not that I'm dissatisfied particularly with anything that I'm experiencing, but I'm also not fully satisfied. It's like I wake up to a question of greater purpose. And I think it's something that my wife and I came together out of a shared desire to live like this, out of a shared desire to be looking at ourselves and to be constantly transforming, constantly moving, constantly shifting, evolving. So she's one of the people that I share my thoughts with when they come up around this area, and she's kind of where I go for as my sort of primary partner in this work. But those impulses have to arise from the person. They have to arise from within. So, I've continued to work on the exercise that I mentioned a few days ago, Immunity to Change. I'm reading a book called Immunity to Change, and there's a kind of process involved in looking at what the one big thing is that we'd like to change. And I did a little bit of work on that today, and it's basically like I've got to figure out my first column. I want to get to where I can really articulate, here's the change, because then I'll actually see what I'm doing to thwart that, and I can actually get under the hood a little bit. I think every once in a while I have this concern that, like, and I've spoken about this a number of times on this post. There's something that I'm sure is not unique to me. It's a feeling of, am I really on track here? Like, is this the path? And when we question whether we're on the path, that should always be a sign. That should always be kind of like okay, I know what this question is designed to do. This question is designed to distract me from whatever's right in front of me, so that I can start to reevaluate the whole journey rather than just deal with what's right in front of me, or even just see what's right in front of me. And so when I hear that question come up for myself, I've learned to sort of be on guard. I've learned to sort of recognize, wait a minute, that's a sign. In a weird way, it's a sign that I'm getting close to something. It's a sign that something's about to come through. It's a sign that something is kind of knocking on the door nearby. But the work is still to listen to that, to find a way to really tune in. I've been meditating slightly longer recently, and whenever I do that, what shows up is that initially it's almost always the case that more meditation kind of destabilizes things. Feels like it shakes things up. And I've become accustomed to that as a pattern. I've become accustomed to that as a typical experience, because ultimately meditation is that tuning in process. Meditation is tuning into the source of everything and being awake. And when our meditation slips, it can kind of we can get into compulsive behavior more deeply without noticing it. So a lot of times, this is why either beginning a meditation practice if you're not very experienced with it, or restarting a meditation practice if we've been away from it for a while. This is why those things can be sort of uncomfortable, because a lot of times meditation will be like kicking up sand on the bottom of the ocean. Felt like the water was clear, and all of a sudden there's this sand here. And and it feels like, well, that's not, meditation's supposed to make me more calm. It's supposed to make me feel more at peace. Why is it making me feel less at peace? Well, it's not. It's just revealing where we are not feeling at peace and not noticing it. One thing that Sadhguru talks about, it's like a metaphor or a fable almost in one of his books. Talks about a courting ritual or a test that people would go through at some point, and it was a bit of I don't know how it plays as far as gender norms in our current society, but basically a woman gets dressed up in this metal outfit, like almost like chainmail all over her body, and then the man is supposed to try and get the chainmail off, and of course it's impossible to do, and the man never succeeds, and they keep getting more and more drunk, and eventually the man just passes out. Maybe this is a myth of some kind, but I don't think it is. I think it's an actual ritual of some kind, but don't quote me on it. I can't speak to the details of it. But the point is, there's one pin in this outfit that if you pull this one pin, all of it falls apart. It all falls off. And Sadhguru tells this story, or uses it as an allegory for the spiritual process, where there's something we want so badly and we can't get it. And we try everything we can, but we just become increasingly incapacitated until we finally give up or fall asleep. But the pin that we need to pull in order to succeed in the spiritual transformative process is the pin of identity. Pulling the pin of identity. And this keeps coming back to me, this keeps coming back to me as an image and as a principle, because almost any identity is ultimately indefensible, is ultimately going to die, is ultimately impermanent. So ultimately, any identity that we're invested in is a recipe for disaster. We're gonna, if we're identified with literally anything, then we will feel that death, that whatever form death takes for that identity, that's a mortal threat. But you pull the pin of identity and nothing is a threat. Pulling the pin of identity means now I'm no longer identified with anything that can die. It's a tall order, but it's what it means to live. That's what I got today, folks. If you're still watching at this point, I appreciate you. You've followed me on kind of a meandering path today, but sometimes that's how the path goes. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you soon.